Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder why when someone is really unwell, like with catatonia, they seem to get better in a specific order, not just all at once? Today we're diving into a fascinating theory that might just explain the why behind that consistent recovery pattern. This paper is all about catatonia, a really serious condition where people can lose their ability to move, talk, or respond. But here is the really interesting part. Doctors notice that people recovering from catatonia often seem to get better in a predictable sequence. They call this the Saito Loop, and this research is trying to figure out if this order is just a coincidence or if it is actually built into how our brains work. So the big question here is this: why does recovery from catatonia follow this specific order, and not just any random order? The researchers here aren't trying to find a new treatment. They're trying to build a computer model that can predict how someone might recover. They want to see if the recovery order naturally pops out of the model's own rules without being told what that order is. It's like saying if you build a machine with these specific parts and these specific connections, will it automatically do this specific thing without you programming that specific thing in? Basically, they're taking a theory called active inference, which is a way to think about how the brain makes sense of the world and tries to predict things. And they're saying that within this active inference framework, maybe the specific components that are messed up in catatonia and need to recover naturally fall into a certain order of dependence. If one part needs another part to be working first, then that automatically creates a sequence. Let's break down what these 5 things are. They're called precisions in this theory. Think of precision as how much weight or importance the brain gives to different sources of information. First, to raise sensory precision, which is how well you can perceive and distinguish what's happening around you. Then policy precision, which is how confidently you can choose one action over another. Next, motivational precision, which is about how much you prefer certain outcomes of your actions. After that, fast contextual volatility, which is detecting changes within your current situation. And finally, slow structural volatility, which is about registering when the whole context or situation has changed. The researchers argue that these 5 are the minimum number of separate things the brain needs to be able to do to explain what they see in catatonia. If you have fewer than 5, you can't explain why certain symptoms appear or disappear independently. If you have more than 5, then you're adding things that you can't actually see or measure with the available clinical observations. It's like having the right number of puzzle pieces to complete the picture without having extra weird pieces. Now, for the really cool part, the ordering, they're not just saying there are 5 parts, they're saying these parts have a specific dependency structure. Imagine building a tower. You can't put the top brick on before you have the bottom ones. The researchers used a mathematical concept called structural identifiability, which basically means, can we tell if a particular component is working correctly just from the available data? They found that for each of these 5 precisions to be individually identifiable from the patient's symptoms, you need the precisions below them in the chain to be functioning first. For example, they say you can't estimate motivational precision, which is about preferring outcomes, if you can't even initiate an action in the first place. Without action, there are no outcomes to prefer, so that part of your brain can't even be measured. Similarly, you need to be able to choose actions with some confidence policy precision before you can really value the outcomes of those actions, motivational precision. This dependency creates a chain, and what's mind-blowing is that when they mathematically worked out these dependencies based on how information flows in the brain, they found there was only one possible order that fit. And that order is exactly the Saito Loop they observed clinically. This is huge because it means the observed order isn't just a coincidence, it's a structural consequence of how these computational parts of the brain are wired together. The order isn't something they fed into the model, it's something that emerged from the model's own logic. So how does this structural order turn into a recovery order in time? The researchers propose a recovery law. It's like saying a part of the brain can only recover and get back to normal if the parts it depends on have already started recovering. Think of it like a series of gates. Each gate can only open if the gate before it is open. This information, limited recovery law combined with the dependency structure, means that if everything starts at the same level of severity, then the recovery will naturally follow the identified chain. They ran simulations and checked how robust this finding is. They found that even when they tweaked different settings within their model, the Saito Loop order almost always held up. One of the most important aspects of this research is that it's testable. They argue that their theory makes specific predictions about what kind of recovery order would falsify it. If a patient recovers in a way that contradicts this predicted order, it means something is wrong with their model. And the amazing part is they say this can be tested in a single patient without needing large clinical trials. They even did a thorough check by looking at many different possible models and found that only the Saito Loop architecture could explain all the observed features of catatonia recovery, like the specific order, the separation of certain symptoms, and how sparing one capacity affects others. So what's the big takeaway here? This research suggests that the consistent order of recovery seen in catatonia isn't just a random pattern. It's a fundamental consequence of how our brains process information and make decisions. The brain is hierarchical and interdependent. When things go wrong, like in catatonia, the way they get better follows the underlying structure of these dependencies. This is a really powerful idea because it shifts how we think about psychiatric recovery. Instead of just observing a pattern, it suggests to raise a deeper computational reason for it. This could lead to more precise predictions about recovery and even help us understand which specific parts of the brain are struggling the most at different stages of illness or treatment. Now for my take on this study. The strengths are immense. They're not just observing a phenomenon, they're building a theoretical framework to explain it using principles from computational neuroscience. The idea that the recovery order is a deductive consequence of the brain's architecture, rather than just an empirical observation, is a really big leap. They've made their theory falsifiable, which is a hallmark of good science. However, like all research, this has limitations. The theory relies on the active inference framework, which is itself a complex model of the brain. While they've tried to be minimal in their assumptions, there are still underlying assumptions about how the brain works that need further validation. Also, translating these abstract computational quantities like precisions into concrete observable behaviors and brain activity is still a challenge. They acknowledge that a direct mapping to neural circuits is speculative. The implications here are profound. If this theory holds, it means we can understand recovery as a readout of the brain's functional architecture. It could guide more targeted interventions by identifying which computational layer is most impaired. And the fact that it is falsifiable in a single patient is revolutionary for clinical application. Imagine being able to predict a potential inversion in recovery and knowing that it points to a specific spared capacity at the onset of illness. Future research could focus on validating these computational quantities with neuroimaging and behavioral experiments. Testing this theory in other conditions with sequential recovery patterns would also be fascinating. And further work is needed to fully understand the recovery law and its necessary and sufficient conditions beyond the sufficient gating-dominated regime. This research is a brilliant example of how computational modeling can shed light on complex clinical phenomena and transform our understanding of brain disorders. It turns an observed regularity into a principled scientific prediction. What do you think about this theory of hierarchical recovery? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this explanation helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more deep dives into the science of the mind. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.